He stood at the threshold of Street Mercy's orphanage, his Italian loafers planted on the worn-out steps that had once been his childhood domain. Daniel West, now a self-made millionaire with a reputation for ruthless business deals, never thought he would return here, yet the echoes of his past called him home. The faint smell of freshly baked bread from the orphanage kitchen fused with the crisp autumn air. His heart pounded with conflicting emotions, gratitude, bitterness, nostalgia, and hope. Though he had come armed with a lavish donation, Daniel intended to leave quickly, until a small, tremulous voice cried his name, shaking the foundations of everything he thought he knew. Growing up in Street Mercy's orphanage, Daniel West never had a peaceful night's sleep. The building's aging pipes rattled, its stone walls groaned in the winter winds, and the clamour of dozens of children, all needing comfort, echoed through the sparse halls. He had left at 18, certain he would never come back. Yet now, 12 years later, he found himself on those same steps he'd once raced down with scuffed sneakers. Only this time, he was dressed in a tailored suit and arrived in a chauffeur-driven town car. His life story had become the stuff of local legend. The boy with no parents who soared to impossible heights. The entrepreneurial genius who turned a small construction startup into a conglomerate. Journalists called him cunning and unstoppable. Admirers named him brilliant. But as the sun dipped behind the orphanage's gabled roof, Daniel realized he felt smaller than he had in years. His success was an exterior shell. He was back to being the frightened orphan, uncertain of his place in the world. He tightened his grip on the thick envelope he planned to hand over to the head of the orphanage, Sister Margaret Walters. Although Sister was more a courtesy title for the woman who had dedicated her life to nurturing abandoned children, she had always presented herself with the quiet dignity of a nun. Daniel remembered her lined face and gentle smile. She had been a stabilizing force in the orphanage, doing what she could for him and all the other children with scarce resources. Yet Daniel also recalled the nights he would stare at the orphanage's peeling wallpaper, hating every minute he spent within those confines, vowing he would break free from the cycle of poverty and heartbreak. He imagined the new generation of orphans running around these halls, drifting in and out of foster homes. He wondered if any of them understood how painful it was to dream of a future you weren't sure you deserved. Before stepping inside, Daniel glanced back at his driver, Charles Hathaway, an old friend who had become not only his personal assistant but, in many ways, his closest confidant. Charles was the only person Daniel trusted enough to learn about the scars from his youth. "You sure you want to do this alone, boss?" Charles asked gently, noticing the flicker of trepidation in Daniel's eyes. "I need to," Daniel said, clearing his throat. "Give me half an hour." With that, Daniel climbed the steps, each footfall echoing in his memory. Despite the orphanage's attempts to maintain appearance, the railing's paint was chipped, and the front door's brass handle was tarnished with age. The place smelled of homemade soup, probably the same kind they had served when he was a child. That scent ignited a swirl of unwanted memories in his mind. Inside, he found the entry hall mostly deserted. A couple of older children, possibly in their early teens, darted by, too absorbed in their conversation to notice him. He approached the worn wooden desk that served as reception and recognized Sister Margaret Walters in an instant. She was older now, silver hair pinned back in a bun, her once energetic stride replaced by a more measured pace. Yet her eyes were still kind, still bright with hope. She looked up, squinting through her bifocals, and her face lit with recognition. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My goodness, I never thought, my dear child. It's so wonderful to see you." Daniel smiled. "It's been a while." Her hand trembled as she reached for his. You've grown into such a handsome, successful man. I always prayed you'd find happiness." He nodded. "I came to fulfill a promise I made long ago. The orphanage needs repairs, funding everything. I'm here to help." Sister Margaret led him through the hallway toward her small office at the back. The floors squeaked just as they had when he was a boy. The overhead lights cast the same soft glow, and the plaster walls bore the same cracks. Within the little office, which smelled of dusty books and old paperwork, Daniel took a seat in front of a beat-up oak desk. He slid the thick envelope across. "These are documents from my legal team," he explained, "and a check. It should cover the next year's operational budget, maybe more." A tear slipped from Sister Margaret's eye as she tried to still her shaking hands. "You can't imagine what this means. We were so close to shutting down. The city threatened to cut our municipal grant." "I feared for the children." "You won't have to fear anymore," Daniel said, his voice calmer than he felt. "Use the money for repairs, improved living conditions, whatever you need." She stood and came around the desk to embrace him, murmuring heartfelt thanks. And in that moment, Daniel felt a small measure of solace. He could offer these children a better life than the one he'd endured. Perhaps it would never fully heal his childhood scars, but it was something. He spent a few more minutes speaking with Sister Margaret about immediate needs upgrades to the heating system, new mattresses, fresh paint, more tutoring programs. Satisfied that she had a plan, Daniel politely excused himself. The orphanage caretaker, Mr. Thomas Gray, a pragmatic man in his mid-40s, approached to thank Daniel personally. Realizing he was short on time, Daniel made a mental note to return if necessary. For now, he would let the donation speak for itself. As Daniel walked back through the hallway toward the exit, he barely noticed that more children had returned from school, the place now buzzing with chatter. He was lost in his own thoughts until he heard it, a tremulous cry, like a plea half-formed. "Daniel, Daniel West." He froze, the hair on his neck standing up. It wasn't Sister Margaret or any adult voice. It was a small, thin cry, like a child calling out for help, for familiarity. His chest went cold. How could a child here know his name? He hadn't visited in over a decade. He turned, scanning the corridor filled with children. They were in small clusters, backpacks slung over shoulders, some rummaging through lockers. Then he spotted a boy no older than 8, standing alone. The boy's eyes were wide and full of desperation. He repeated, "Daniel West." Their gazes met. Something in those bright brown eyes transfixed Daniel, an echo of his own childhood reflection, perhaps. The boy, wearing worn jeans and a grey T-shirt, took a shaky step forward. "Sister Margaret," Daniel called, baffled. Who is this child? But she was still in her office. No one else seemed to notice, or they assumed the boy was simply shouting nonsense. Daniel found himself walking forward, drawn by the child's gaze. He felt an inexplicable pull in his chest, as if the boy's voice bypassed all his defenses. "Yes?" Daniel said quietly, kneeling down so that he was at eye level. "I'm Daniel West." "What's your name?" The boy pressed his lips together, tears welling. They said you come from here, that you were a kid here, and you made it out. Are you really him? Are you?" Daniel nodded slowly, taken aback by the intensity in the child's voice. "I did grow up here." "My name is Oliver," the boy said, voice trembling. "Oliver Parker." "What is it, Oliver? Why are you calling me?" Oliver took a deep breath, his shoulders shaking. "1. I saw your picture in a newspaper. Sister Margaret kept it in a file. She said you used to be here, and now you're a millionaire. Can you help me find my parents?" Daniel felt a gut punch he had not expected. He recalled the agony of not knowing who his parents were, why they abandoned him, where they might be. He reached out to place a steady hand on Oliver's shoulder. "I don't know your circumstances, Oliver." The boy's tears slipped free. "They said they gave me up, but I don't believe it. I want to know why." I want to know if I have a home." Daniel found himself speechless. He stared at Oliver's tear-streaked cheeks and felt an echo of that raw, gnawing pain he once harbored. He heard Sister Margaret's hurried footsteps behind him, but he didn't move. Oliver's plea, the desperate hope in his eyes, was like looking into a mirror of the past. Daniel had come here to give money and walk away, yet in that instant he realized he might not be able to simply leave. Not anymore. "Please," Oliver whispered. "I heard you were a powerful man, a good man. Help me." Daniel swallowed, his own throat tight. "I'll try," he managed. "I promise I'll try." Sister Margaret apologized profusely for Oliver's outburst, insisting the boy was new to the orphanage and had endured a turbulent background. She explained that Oliver's file was incomplete, bearing only the scarcest details. His mother's name was Rebecca, who had vanished after dropping him off years ago. No father was listed. Oliver had been shuffled through multiple foster homes, always returning to the orphanage after circumstances broke down. Daniel listened silently. His $1 million donation had been meant to absolve him of guilt and repay his debt to this place. He had not expected to get tangled in a child's search for answers. Yet he found himself unable to refuse. Something about Oliver's trembling plea had struck him deep. He couldn't cast the boy aside. The memory of his own heartbreak, never knowing why his birth mother had left him, still haunted him. As Sister Margaret described Oliver's short life, a chain of heartbreaks, letdowns, and fleeting hope, Daniel felt his determination harden. "I'll do it," he said abruptly. "I'll help." "How?" Sister Margaret asked, both relieved and curious. "You're a busy man, Daniel, and Oliver's birth mother. We have no leads. She vanished long ago." "Then I'll hire an investigator," Daniel said. "I have resources, contacts, people who owe me favors. We'll find out what happened to Oliver's mother." Sister Margaret reached across the desk, patting his hand. "Bless you, Daniel, but be careful. Sometimes these searches uncover truths more painful than the mystery." Daniel nodded, recalling the rumors about his own birth parents, whispers of drug abuse, maybe human trafficking. He had never dared dig too deep, fearing what he would find. Now, ironically, he was diving headlong into Oliver's search for answers. Perhaps he was doing it for the boy, or maybe for the orphan in himself who never found closure. When he left Sister Margaret's office, he found Oliver waiting timidly by the door, twisting the hem of his T-shirt. Word had spread fast among the staff that the wealthy alumnus was stepping in to help. Yet Daniel hardly noticed the other children's stares as he knelt in front of Oliver again. "It might take time," Daniel warned gently, "but I promise I'll try my best to find your mother." The spark of hope that lit Oliver's eyes was like a shaft of sunlight through a grey sky. "Thank you," Oliver whispered. I'm sorry if I made you mad." Daniel's throat constricted. "I'm not mad, Oliver. I understand." And he did, perhaps more than anyone else ever could. Later that evening, Daniel sat in the back seat of his town car as Charles drove them back to their penthouse suite in downtown Rivergate. The city lights glowed across the skyline, the neon reflections dancing in the calm waters of the harbor. But Daniel was miles away in thought. What happened back there? Charles asked quietly, glancing in the rear-view mirror. "You look rattled." Daniel tapped his temple, exhaling slowly. "I'm not sure how to explain it. Something about that kid, Oliver Parker. He called my name like I was some kind of hero. Me, a hero." He gave a hollow laugh. "You run a multi-million-dollar empire," Charles said. "For a kid who grew up in an orphanage, that might seem heroic." Daniel didn't respond. A memory flashed a younger version of himself, maybe 8 or 9, clutching a tattered blanket late at night, tears streaming down his face as he prayed for parents who would never come. The sting of that recollection made him close his eyes. "You're going to help him, aren't you?" Charles asked, though he already knew. "I have to," Daniel said firmly. "I just told Sister Margaret I would." Charles let out a low whistle. All right, boss. So, what's the plan? Daniel gazed out the window. He saw his reflection superimposed on the passing lights, sharp suit, impeccable haircut, a face many would say was handsome, but behind the expensive trappings, he still felt like that lonely boy. I'll start with one of my private investigators. Thomas Gray can handle the legal side, but for the detective work, I'll need someone who's discreet. Charles nodded. Consider it done. As the car glided to a stop in the underground parking garage beneath Daniel's penthouse, Daniel's phone buzzed. He pulled it out to find an email from Susan Walters, head of West Enterprises' philanthropic division. She reminded him of a scheduled press release concerning his donation to Street Mercy's orphanage. A wave of irritation washed over him. This had been about personal closure, not headlines. He texted back a curt response, instructing her to keep the media minimal. Then he stepped out of the car, shoulders slumped. "Charles," he said as they entered the private elevator, "I don't want this to turn into a PR stunt." "It doesn't have to," Charles replied. "But with your status, word always gets out. You just have to control the narrative." Daniel nodded, though weariness tugged at his spirit. He felt an odd combination of dread and responsibility. Helping Oliver might dredge up old wounds, but ignoring the boy's plea would be heartless. He had once prayed for anyone to stand up for him, to fight for him. How could he deny Oliver the chance for answers? 2 days later, Daniel sat in the sleek, glass-walled office of Angela Pierce, a top-tier private investigator known for her tenacity and absolute discretion. At just over 30, Angela had already solved dozens of high-profile missing persons cases. She typed diligently as Daniel outlined Oliver's situation. "Rebecca Parker, presumably mother of Oliver Parker," Daniel explained. "Last known whereabouts, Street Mercy's orphanage 8 years ago." Angela's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's minimal information. Was there a father's name on record?" "None listed," Daniel said, arms folded. "We only have a partial birth certificate with the mother's name Rebecca Parker and some half-completed forms from her intake interviews." Angela jotted down notes. "I'll start with the usual city records, medical files, and known addresses for anyone named Rebecca Parker in the region. It might be a needle in a haystack. You need to be prepared for the possibility that she's changed her name or left the state." Daniel nodded, swallowing a sudden wave of anxiety. "I understand. Time is not an issue. Just keep everything off the radar. I don't want a media circus." Angela gave him a reassuring smile. "I value client confidentiality. You have my word." They finalized the agreement, and as he rose to leave, Angela stopped him. "Why are you personally involved in this case, Mr. West? If you don't mind me asking." Daniel paused at the door, his heart beating a fraction faster. "Let's just say, I see myself in that kid," he replied, his voice taut. "I know what it's like to want answers." Angela's gaze softened. "I'll do my best." With that, Daniel left, the crisp autumn wind hitting him as he stepped onto the busy downtown sidewalk. People rushed by professionals in suits, tourists gawking at skyscrapers, teenagers laughing over smartphones. He felt oddly disconnected from it all, as if he existed in a different plane. And perhaps, in a way, he did. The lonely orphan inside him hadn't vanished. He had merely learned to mask it with wealth and success. Returning to his office at West Enterprises, Daniel went through the motions of a busy afternoon. He authorized construction deals, skimmed financial reports, and managed staff issues. But his focus kept drifting to Oliver. Where was the child now? Had Sister Margaret managed to keep him optimistic? At 5 o'clock, Daniel left early, ignoring the curious stares of his employees, unaccustomed to seeing him depart before sundown. He told Charles to drive him to Street Mercy's, deciding he wanted to see Oliver and make sure the boy was well. In the car, Daniel's mind reeled with memories. He remembered the orphanage's austere sleeping quarters, bunk beds lined in rows, squeaky springs that woke everyone whenever someone turned over. He recalled the meagre dinners, the occasional reward of sweets if they behaved. He also recalled the shame of wearing donated clothes at school, clothes that didn't quite fit. When they arrived at Street, Mercy's, the sun was settling in a golden haze over the building's spire. Sister Margaret greeted him warmly. "This is a lovely surprise," she said, her wrinkles crinkling with delight. "Oliver is in the rec room with the other children, finishing homework." She guided Daniel through the hall. The rec room had changed somewhat. Newly painted walls in pastel colors, a corner full of books, a few donated computers. Oliver sat at a small table, pencil in hand, brow furrowed over a math worksheet. Another boy sat beside him, reading. Oliver looked up when Daniel entered, his face lighting in a brilliant grin. "You came back," Oliver said, voice brimming with excitement. Daniel couldn't help but smile. "I told you I would, didn't I?" Oliver hopped to his feet, nearly toppling his chair. Sister Margaret shushed him gently, and he lowered his voice. "Are you here about my mum?" he asked, glancing around as if afraid to voice the hope too loudly. "Yes," Daniel replied, squatting beside him. "I hired someone to look for her. It might take time, but we're trying." Oliver nodded, hugging his skinny arms around his torso. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes brimming with gratitude. Over the next half hour, Daniel found himself sitting at the small table, helping Oliver with his math assignment. The boy was bright, but needed a bit of encouragement. Daniel found the experience strangely grounding, helping a child with homework in the same rec room he had once disliked. He noticed how Oliver's hair curled slightly at the ends, how his hand would shake a bit when he was unsure. The boy was sweet, polite, but he carried a quiet sadness. After homework time, Oliver asked Daniel about his life outside the orphanage. "Do you have a big house?" he asked, wide-eyed. "I do," Daniel said softly, "but sometimes even a big house can feel lonely." Oliver nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "I get lonely too, but at least I have Sister Margaret. And maybe you?" Daniel's throat went thick. "Yeah, you have me," he echoed. Over the next couple of weeks, Daniel made it a routine to stop by Street, Mercy's at least once or twice. Each time, Oliver was overjoyed to see him, and their bond grew. Daniel found himself reading bedtime stories to the younger children, meeting with Sister Margaret to discuss potential orphanage improvements, and even bringing in architecture consultants to draft a renovation plan. Meanwhile, Angela Pierce provided weekly updates. Leads on the elusive Rebecca Parker were scant. There were multiple women with that name in the wider state, but none matched the approximate age or location. She was digging deeper, searching for hospital records, old addresses, even cross-referencing the day. Oliver was dropped off. So far, nothing concrete had surfaced. But amid these visits, Daniel couldn't ignore the signs that Sister Margaret was not in good health. Once, he caught her coughing so violently she had to clutch a wall for support. Another time she excused herself abruptly from a conversation to tend to her medication. When Daniel gently pressed her, she brushed him off. "I'm just getting old," she insisted with a reassuring smile. "Old bones creak, and the body fails now and then. Don't worry yourself, child." Yet Daniel recognized the hollowness around her eyes. He suspected she was hiding something about her condition. He resolved to speak with her privately. One chilly afternoon, after sharing a meal with the children, Daniel followed Sister Margaret to her office. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. She looked up from her desk, setting aside a stack of papers. "Of course. What is it?" His gaze swept over her lined face, noticing the pallor beneath her usual warmth. "You're not well," he stated plainly. "I've seen you cough, struggle with shortness of breath." "Are you ill?" she sighed, folding her hands in her lap. I've been diagnosed with congestive heart failure, she admitted quietly. The doctors say it's manageable for now, but I shouldn't strain myself. Her eyes flickered with defiance. But I can't stop, Daniel. The children need me. Daniel's chest tightened. Sister Margaret was the closest thing to family, many of these children, had she had been the closest thing to a maternal figure he'd ever known. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could arrange the best medical care, private doctors, whatever you need. She shook her head gently. You've already done so much, child, pouring money into the orphanage, helping Oliver. I didn't want to add to your burdens. Margaret, Daniel said firmly, there's no burden. I owe you my life. You took me in when nobody else wanted me. Tears glistened in her eyes. All right, she finally murmured, her voice cracking. Thank you, Daniel. He clenched his jaw, determination roaring inside him. He would not lose her, not when he could do something about it. He was a man of means now, and he would leverage everything to ensure she received top-tier medical support. It was the least he could do for the woman who had given him hope when he was a frightened boy. A week later, Daniel's phone buzzed at an ungodly hour too, 4:46 a.m. He groaned, fumbling for the device on his nightstand. The caller ID revealed Angela Pierce. His pulse spiked as he answered. Mr. West, Angela said, voice tight, I might have a lead on Rebecca Parker. I found an old shelter record from around the time Oliver was born. A woman named Rebecca Parker sought refuge for a month. She left suddenly and never returned. The shelter manager, Miss Karen Dillard, says she might have traveled to a different city, possibly Houston. Daniel sat up, adrenaline coursing through him. Do you have any proof it's the same Rebecca? No direct proof yet, Angela admitted. But the timeline matches, and Miss Dillard described her as pregnant at the time. This is the strongest lead we've had. Daniel felt hope bloom in his chest, alongside a flicker of dread. What if they found her? What if she wanted nothing to do with Oliver? Keep digging, he told Angela, and keep me updated. The rest of that night passed in restless anticipation. Sleep eluded him, haunted by possibilities. By morning, he was back in his office, finalizing an urgent business merger with a rival construction firm. But his mind was on Oliver. He pictured the boy's bright eyes shining with hope. If they found his mother, perhaps Oliver could have the reunion Daniel had never received. That thought both comforted and pained him. That evening, after a barrage of meetings, Daniel visited Sister Margaret at the hospital. He had arranged a private room with the best cardiologist in the city. She was seated upright in bed, reading a well-worn copy of a children's storybook, perhaps for one of the orphans who visited. Daniel, she greeted softly, this is too much. He offered a small smile, pulling a chair to her bedside. It's never too much for you. How are you feeling? Better, she admitted. The doctors are wonderful. I just hate being away from the children. They'll manage for a bit, Daniel assured her. And I'm keeping tabs on them. She patted his hand. You're a good man, Daniel. I knew it from the day you set foot in that orphanage. He swallowed a lump in his throat. I'm just trying to do what's right. They talked about the orphanage's daily operations, Oliver's progress in school, the upcoming renovation plan. After an hour, Sister Margaret dozed off, exhaustion overcoming her. Daniel quietly left, heart heavy. He turned in the hallway to see a nurse adjusting Margaret's the fourth drip. For the second time in weeks, Daniel felt powerless in the face of a situation he couldn't fully control. All his money, all his success felt insignificant compared to the fragility of life. 2 weeks passed in a blur of business deals, hospital visits, and phone calls with Angela Pierce. Eventually, she rang him with urgent news. I spoke to Miss Dillard again, Angela said, breathlessly. She remembered something else. Rebecca mentioned an ex-boyfriend who lived in Rivergate. She might have gone there after she left the shelter. I did some cross-referencing. There's a man named Kevin Malone who once dated a Rebecca Parker. They had a domestic dispute filed against him 8 years ago. No official charges, but a police report. Then everything went silent. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Where is Kevin Malone now?" "Still in Rivergate," Angela replied. "He works at a mechanic shop on the outskirts of town. I'm not sure if he's in contact with Rebecca, but he might know more." Daniel felt a surge of determination. "I'll go see him." "Wait, are you sure?" Angela asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "This man has a history of violence." "Let me handle it." "No," Daniel said firmly. "If this is Oliver's father, or if he knows something about Rebecca, I need to speak to him myself. I'll be careful." He hung up, his mind racing. The orphan inside him still wanted to run from these messy complications, but his loyalty to Oliver compelled him to face them head-on. He arranged for Charles to drive him the next morning, instructing him to wait nearby in case of trouble. The mechanic shop was a low, corrugated metal building next to a deserted stretch of highway. Faded signs advertised oil changes and engine repairs. Daniel stepped out of the town car, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline filling his nostrils. Inside, a lanky teen wearing earphones nodded at Daniel in greeting and pointed to a far corner where a heavily tattooed man with greasy overalls worked on an old sedan. "That's Kevin," the teen said, returning to his music. Daniel approached cautiously. "Kevin Malone?" The man glanced up, suspicious. His dark hair was slick with sweat and oil, and his beady eyes darted over Daniel's expensive suit. "Yeah, who's asking?" Daniel cleared his throat, keeping his voice steady. "My name's Daniel West. I'm trying to find Rebecca Parker." A flicker of recognition, then hostility passed through Kevin's eyes. He tossed the wrench onto the work table. "What's this about?" Daniel took a deep breath. Rebecca had a child, Oliver Parker, who's now at Street Mercy's orphanage. Kevin's lip curled. "So, that's her mess. Not mine." Anger flared in Daniel's chest, but he forced it down. "Oliver's looking for his mother. I need to know if you have any idea where she might be." Kevin scoffed, folding his arms, grease smearing across them. "Haven't seen Becky in years. She showed up once, hysterical, claiming she was pregnant. Told her it wasn't mine, and if it was, I didn't want it. She left." End of story. His words struck Daniel like a blow. He tried to keep his voice calm, though it quivered with mounting rage. "You never thought to check, to see if maybe it was your child? To help?" Kevin shrugged, leaning against the car's frame. "She was trouble, man, always crying about something. I got tired of it. If she had a kid, that's on her." Daniel clenched his fists, but he refrained from violence. "So, you don't know anything else? Any lead? Any name she used? Anywhere she might have gone?" "She said something about going to her aunt's in Houston." Kevin spat. "That's all I remember. Now get out before I call the cops." Daniel stared into Kevin's cold eyes, a wave of disgust roiling within him. For a moment, he recalled the nights he used to pray for a father figure, only to realize this was the sort of man Oliver might have ended up with. The thought made him nauseous. Without another word, Daniel turned and walked out, ignoring Kevin's muttered curse. Once back in the car, Charles gave him a concerned glance. "All good, boss?" "Drive," Daniel said tersely. As the car sped away, he tried to calm the fury in his chest. Kevin Malone was a dead end, but he had confirmed one thing: Rebecca had planned to travel to Houston. That might be the next lead Angela needed. By the time Daniel returned to West Enterprises' offices, storm clouds had gathered overhead, threatening rain. He felt drained, though he still had a board meeting to attend. As he navigated the labyrinth of polished hallways, he realized how, at times, he hated the corporate world. He had built it, thrived in it, yet it felt hollow compared to the raw purpose he felt helping Oliver. In the boardroom, a half-dozen executives waited around a mahogany table. They greeted Daniel with a mixture of deference and anxiety. His temper had become legendary. They wanted to finalize the paperwork for the new merger. He listened to the usual arguments, the jockeying for power, the concerns about overhead costs. Normally, Daniel would dominate the room with his commanding presence. But now his thoughts drifted to the orphanage, Oliver, Sister Margaret. At some point, a senior executive, Frederick Burns, droned on about profit margins. Daniel's eyes flicked to the window, where fat raindrops trailed across the glass. He recalled Oliver's timid smile, how the boy's entire world might change if they found his mother. He also remembered the deep sense of betrayal he would feel if she turned out to be incapable or unwilling to care for him. Eventually, he snapped out of his reverie, curtly approving the deal. The executives left the room. Relieved, Daniel stayed behind, rubbing his temples. An odd, gnawing dread pressed down on him. He recognized it: fear of heartbreak, fear of letting Oliver down. This was a tension he couldn't solve with a stroke of his pen or a burst of capital. Emotions, family, identity, these were intangible complexities. He left for street. Mercy's once again stopping in the hospital to check on Sister Margaret. Her condition had stabilized somewhat, thanks to the specialized care. She beamed at him, though her face was still pale. "How was your day, dear?" she asked weakly. Daniel forced a smile. "Eventful. We might have a lead on Oliver's mother in Houston." Sister Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, a small smile touching her lips. "God willing, Oliver may find what he seeks. But remember, Daniel, sometimes we don't get the answers we want. Be there for him no matter what." Her words sank in deep. He promised he would, and soon after he left her to rest, heading to the orphanage. Rain battered the windows as Daniel stepped inside. Children crowded the halls in after-school chaos, but Oliver was waiting in the foyer, hugging his backpack. "Daniel!" Oliver exclaimed, eyes bright even in the dim light. "I was hoping you'd come." Daniel ruffled the boy's hair. "Couldn't stay away, kiddo. How was your day?" Oliver shrugged. "Math test. Think I did okay." His gaze flickered nervously. "Any news?" Daniel crouched to meet his eyes. "We might have a clue," he said gently. "Your mother may have gone to Houston. We're looking into it now." Oliver's face lit, though uncertainty shimmered there as well. You think maybe she'll want to see me?" Daniel's heart twisted. "I can't promise anything, Oliver. But no matter what we find, I'm here for you." For the first time, Oliver nodded slowly, tears brimming. He dashed them away before hugging Daniel in a rare show of affection. In that moment, Daniel felt a surge of protectiveness and love. Yes, love for this child he barely knew, but who reminded him of everything he once was. Days turned to weeks, and Angela's investigation took her to Houston. She dug through shelter records, hospital admissions, and old job applications. Finally, she found a small trace. A woman named Rebecca Parker had worked briefly at a diner in a rundown neighborhood, but she disappeared after only a month. Another dead end, yet Angela persisted. During this period, Daniel's routine centered around business dealings, visiting Sister Margaret, and spending evenings at the orphanage. The stress weighed heavily on him. He lost weight, often skipping meals, consumed by the chase for answers. Late at night, he questioned his own motives. Was he truly doing this for Oliver, or to fill his own void? One afternoon, a phone call from Angela shattered Daniel's illusions. "I found a record," she said, "of a Rebecca Parker who died in a car accident 6 years ago." Daniel's heart thudded. "Are you sure it's the same one?" "Not entirely," Angela said slowly, "but the age lines up. She was from Rivergate originally, ended up in Houston. It could be her. I'll check dental records, see if we can confirm, but it doesn't look good." A cold wave of dread passed over Daniel. If Oliver's mother was dead, then this entire search would end in heartbreak. How could he tell Oliver that his mother would never come for him? Daniel sank into his office chair, trying to steady his breathing. Do it. Verify. Let me know as soon as possible. He hung up and buried his face in his hands. A swirl of memories washed over him. Nights he prayed for his mother to return. The agony when no one ever came. He had survived, grown up, made a new life. But Oliver was only 8. Would he be able to endure such devastation? Less than a day later, Angela called again. "It's not her," she said, relief evident in her voice. "The deceased woman's dental records don't match the ones from Rebecca Parker's file. Your Rebecca Parker is still out there." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Keep going." With fresh resolve, Angela expanded her search to more obscure databases, rummaging through old rental agreements, cross-checking social media. Meanwhile, Sister Margaret's health improved enough for her to return to the orphanage, though she was under strict doctor's orders to limit her activities. Daniel ensured she had home care aides and a comfortable private room in the orphanage's adjacent living quarters. During that transition, Daniel found a letter in Sister Margaret's files unopened, addressed to the orphanage, dated 9 years ago. The return address was partially smudged, but the name read R. Parker. Heart-pounding, Daniel carefully opened it. Within was a single page, words written in a shaky hand. "Dear Sister Margaret, I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is Rebecca Parker. I'm in trouble. I have nowhere else to turn. I'm expecting a child, but I can't care for him. Please help me. I'm sorry. No signature beyond that. No further details." The envelope's postmark was from San Antonio, Texas. Daniel felt chills. This letter was proof that Rebecca had reached out before Oliver was born. She had wanted help from the orphanage she knew might take her in, but clearly something had gone wrong. She never arrived. Instead, Oliver ended up alone. Why? He brought the letter to Sister Margaret, whose eyes filled with sorrow. "I must have overlooked it in a stack of mail. Or it arrived when I was hospitalized for pneumonia that year. I'm so sorry, Daniel. If only we'd known." Daniel's thoughts whirled. This might confirm that she headed to Texas. "We'll pass it to Angela." Sister Margaret nodded, tears threatening to spill. Poor Rebecca, poor Oliver. The next weeks tested Daniel's patience. He juggled the largest construction contract of his career, renovating a historic district downtown, while anxiously awaiting word from Angela. A swirl of rumors about his philanthropic work leaked to the press, and he found himself fielding calls from reporters eager for a feel-good story. He refused interviews, wanting to safeguard Oliver's privacy. Despite his hectic schedule, Daniel carved out time to help Oliver with homework and chat about everyday life. He taught Oliver how to tie a Windsor knot, how to ride the bus safely, even how to practice mindful breathing when anxiety struck. In turn, Oliver gradually let down his guard, sharing small pieces of his fears and dreams. He wanted to be an architect, to design safe houses for children without families. He also admitted, with a shaky voice, that he sometimes had nightmares about never finding his mother. "Whether we find her or not, Oliver, you're not alone," Daniel said, a hand on Oliver's shoulder. The boy nodded, tears shining in his eyes. Meanwhile, Sister Margaret's presence around the orphanage provided a soothing balm. Though she couldn't move about as much, she offered comfort and stability. Her health was still delicate, but the children lit up whenever she read to them or offered her wise counsel. One late evening, after finishing a bedtime story for the younger kids, Daniel walked the dimly lit corridors with Oliver by his side. A hush fell over the orphanage as most children prepared for bed. They passed Daniel's old bunk area, which had been converted into a storage space. Memories rushed back, nights of whispered secrets, the squeak of bed springs, the musty odor of old blankets. Oliver glanced up at him. Do you ever feel angry that you never found your parents? Daniel's throat constricted. He paused, resting a hand on Oliver's shoulder. I used to, he admitted. Sometimes I still do, especially when I wonder what my life would have been like if they stayed. But I've come to realize that the love I needed, I found it in other places, like Sister Margaret, like friends who became my family. Oliver hugged himself. What if I can't find that kind of love? You can, Daniel whispered. And you will. A month later, on a cold, blustery morning, Angela Pierce appeared unannounced at Daniel's office. He rose to greet her, noticing the solemn expression on her face. She sat across from him, taking a breath. I have news. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but it's significant. She handed him a manila folder containing documents and several photographs. Daniel flipped through them. There was a faded photo of a young woman with chestnut hair standing in front of a diner. She looked tired but hopeful, a small smile on her lips. That's Rebecca Parker, Angela said. I confirmed her identity through an old co-worker. She was living under a different last name, Rebecca Coleman, in Houston. The co-worker said she left abruptly, citing a family emergency. Daniel scanned the next papers. Medical records, Rebecca Parker had been hospitalized for a severe infection a few years back, nearly dying from complications. She vanished from the hospital before her discharge. The trail led to a halfway house for women with addictions, then another disappearance. Angela sighed. Seems she struggled with substance abuse. Possibly why she believed she couldn't raise Oliver. Daniel's stomach churned. Is she alive? Angela's expression darkened. Yes, I located her in a small town an hour outside Houston, Pine Creek. She was arrested for possession and intent to distribute last year, but the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. She currently works part-time at a roadside convenience store. I have the address. Daniel felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that Rebecca was alive, dread at the possibility she might be unwilling or unable to care for Oliver. Does she know Oliver exists? He asked, voice low. Angela folded her hands. She does. Co-workers say she's talked about her son occasionally, expressing regret. She's also rumored to be in a rough crowd. This might not be the heartwarming reunion we hope for. Daniel leaned back in his chair, mind spinning. Oliver wants answers. We need to see if Rebecca can give them to him. Angela nodded, passing him the address. I can go with you. No, Daniel interrupted, jaw set. I'll go myself. 3 days later, Daniel flew to Houston on his private jet, then drove a rental car through a winding countryside to Pine Creek. The roads grew narrower, fields stretching in every direction. He tried to imagine how Rebecca ended up here, running from her demons perhaps, or seeking anonymity. He dreaded what he might find. The convenience store was a run-down shack near a lonely intersection. Faded signs advertised sodas and cigarettes. Daniel parked and entered, the smell of stale coffee and cleaning supplies assaulting his nose. Behind the counter, a woman with tired eyes and unkempt hair scanned him warily. He recognized her from the photo, Rebecca Parker. She froze, recognition flickering on her face. You, she whispered, fear and confusion mingling. I've seen you in the news. You're that big shot from Rivergate, Daniel West. He nodded, heart pounding. I'm here about your son, Oliver. Rebecca's eyes widened, and she clenched the counter edge. How is he? Daniel forced an even tone. He's in Street Mercy's orphanage, where I grew up. He's safe, doing well in school, but he wants to find you. She swallowed, a flicker of shame crossing her features. I couldn't take care of him. I tried, but I was. Messed up. Drugs, bad relationships. I didn't want him around that. So I gave him up. It was selfish, but I couldn't do better. A wave of anger surged through Daniel, but as he looked at her trembling hands, hollow cheeks and haunted eyes, He realized she was carrying her own torment. You could have reached out. Sister Margaret would have helped you. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I wrote to her once, but I never heard back. I thought nobody cared. I was broke, desperate. She sniffed, anger rising. Don't judge me. You don't know what it's like to fight addiction, to have nowhere to turn. Daniel's breath shook. I'm not here to judge. I'm here for Oliver. He's 8. He wants to know why you left. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. Tell him I couldn't be the mother he deserved. Daniel stared at her. That's not enough. He wants to see you. Panic flared in her eyes. No, I can't. I can't do that. I'm not fit to be in his life. I'm still struggling. I can't even take care of myself. Daniel's jaw tightened. He doesn't need you to raise him. He needs answers, closure. Maybe you do too. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She turned away, fiddling with a pack of cigarettes. I don't know if I can face him, she whispered. I'm ashamed. And I'm clean now, but barely holding on. I don't want to hurt him more. The store's doorbell jingled as a customer entered. Rebecca hastily composed herself, and Daniel stepped aside to let her ring up the man's purchase. After the customer left, Daniel leaned forward on the counter. He's just a child, longing for you. If you refuse, he'll never stop wondering. And I grew up without answers. Trust me, it haunts you forever. She pressed a trembling hand to her face. I need time, she finally croaked. Time to figure out if I can handle this. Daniel nodded, forcing back emotion. I'll pay for your transport to Rivergate. You can stay in a safe place. Get help if you need it. Just come see him, at least once, so he knows the truth. Rebecca swallowed, eyes distant. Let me think about it. He handed her his business card. My personal number. Call me. She stared at it, tears glinting. Thank you, Daniel. You didn't have to do this. He turned to leave, heart heavy. Outside, the sky was grey, a chill wind blowing. He felt uncertain. Rebecca was fragile, teetering on the edge. Would she have the strength to face Oliver? Or would she vanish again? A week passed, with no word. Daniel threw himself into philanthropic work at the orphanage, overseeing renovations, waiting anxiously for a sign from Rebecca. Oliver asked every day if there was news, and Daniel had to temper the boy's hope. Sister Margaret, sensing Daniel's turmoil, advised patience. Then, on a brisk afternoon, Daniel's phone rang. An unknown number from Texas. His heart leaped as he answered. It's me, Rebecca said, her voice trembling. I quit my job. I want to see Oliver. Daniel's relief was palpable. Good. I'll arrange a flight, a car, a safe place. No, she interrupted quietly. I'll take the bus. I want to do this on my own terms. Daniel understood. She needed to feel capable, not coddled. All right. When do you arrive? Tomorrow evening. Tell him to meet me at the orphanage if it's okay. Daniel closed his eyes, shoulders sagging with relief. Okay, we'll be there. Thank you. The next day, tension built at Street Mercy's. Sister Margaret carefully arranged a private room for the meeting, wanting to shield Oliver from public eyes in case the reunion was painful. Oliver, wearing his best sweater, was a bundle of nerves, pacing the hallway with Daniel by his side. She's really coming? Oliver asked for the 10th time, voice quivering with excitement and fear. She's on her way, Daniel affirmed gently, though his own heart hammered. He feared what might happen if this meeting turned sour. A knock on the door shattered the stillness. Sister Margaret ushered them into the private sitting room. Rebecca stood there, clutching a small duffel bag, her hair combed neatly, though her face was drawn with anxiety. Oliver froze in the doorway, his gaze locked on the woman who bore a faint resemblance to him, same chestnut hair, same big brown eyes. "Mum?" Oliver whispered, voice cracking. Rebecca's face crumpled. "Oliver," she breathed, tears spilling as she rushed forward. She dropped to her knees, arms open. Oliver stood frozen a moment, Then he lunged into her arms, sobbing. Daniel swallowed a lump, stepping back to give them space. Sister Margaret placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder, tears shining in her eyes too. For a long moment, mother and son clung to each other, tears mixing with shaky laughter. "I'm sorry," Rebecca choked. "I'm so sorry." Oliver just held on, burying his face against her shoulder. Daniel felt his eyes sting with unshed tears, remembering how he had longed for such a moment. He was glad Oliver would at least have answers. Eventually, they settled on a small couch. Oliver peppered Rebecca with questions. "Why did you leave? Where did you go? Do you still love me?" She tried to answer, voice trembling, confessing she'd struggled with addiction, that she felt too broken to provide a home, that she loved him so much it scared her. Her words were raw, imperfect, but honest. Daniel lingered quietly near the door, prepared to intervene if Oliver became upset. But the boy seemed to handle it with surprising resilience, asking questions that would have shattered an adult. The moment was heartbreaking and beautiful in equal measure. In the days that followed, Rebecca remained in Rivergate, lodging in a modest apartment. Daniel had arranged for short-term rentals, though she stubbornly insisted on paying what she could. She visited Oliver daily, forging a fragile bond with him. Sister Margaret offered guidance, gently supporting their tentative reunion. Oliver was overjoyed to have found his mother, yet uncertain about the future. Would she stay? Could she take him back? Daniel sensed Rebecca was overwhelmed, still grappling with her recovery. She attended counseling sessions Daniel quietly funded, determined to stay clean. But she was honest that she wasn't ready to be a full-time mother yet. One afternoon, Daniel found Rebecca alone in the orphanage courtyard, smoking a cigarette despite the posted rules. She hastily dropped it when she saw him, looking ashamed. "Sorry," she muttered. "Old habits." Daniel gave a tight smile. "How are you holding up?" She stared at the orphanage's worn bricks. "It's hard. Facing my mistakes, looking at Oliver, he's so sweet and strong. I feel like I don't deserve him." Daniel folded his arms, exhaling. "We can't change the past, Rebecca, but we can shape the future. Oliver forgives you, which is more grace than most people ever get." She nodded, tears forming. "He's extraordinary. Thank you, Daniel, for not giving up on us." He managed a small smile, recalling the nightmares of his own abandoned childhood. "You're doing the hard part, staying, trying to make amends. That takes courage." They stood quietly for a moment, the wind rustling the trees. Finally, Rebecca extinguished her cigarette. "I want to be better." "For him," Daniel nodded. "Then keep going to counseling, keep showing up for Oliver, one day at a time." Gradually, the tension subsided. Oliver beamed brighter each day, proud to have a mother who visited. At the same time, Daniel found himself cast in a paternal role. Oliver looked to him for day-to-day guidance, while Rebecca established a more uncertain, delicate relationship. Sister Margaret's health stabilized, and she watched the unfolding story with teary-eyed gratitude. In late spring, renovations at the orphanage completed, unveiling new bedrooms, a refitted kitchen, a more welcoming, recreational space. At a small dedication ceremony, the mayor praised Daniel's generosity. But Daniel, standing at the podium, felt uneasy with the spotlight. He gazed at Oliver, who stood beside Rebecca, cheeks flushed with pride. When the ceremony ended, Oliver ran up to Daniel. "This place looks amazing," he exclaimed. "Sister Margaret says we have you to thank. And can I thank you?" Daniel, kneeling down, smiled. "Sure." Oliver threw his arms around Daniel's neck in a fierce hug. "Thank you for making a home for us." He paused, voice wavering. You're like my family." Emotions welled in Daniel's chest. He hugged Oliver back, heart full. "You're my family too." Rebecca, standing nearby, caught Daniel's eye. She mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded, understanding they had forged a makeshift family out of shattered pieces, a mother seeking redemption, a child craving love, and a millionaire who finally realized wealth wasn't everything. As the months passed, Rebecca continued her recovery. She managed a steady job at a local diner, saved money, and spoke with social workers about eventually taking custody of Oliver. But it was a slow process, one that required consistent evidence of stability. Oliver remained at Street Mercy's while the plan unfolded, still relying on Daniel's support. Sister Margaret's health improved enough for her to resume full duties, though she vowed to accept Daniel's help if her condition worsened. Under her watchful eye, the orphanage thrived anew, funded by Daniel's donations and guided by his genuine concern. The scrawny, frightened child who once sobbed for a mother that never came was now blossoming into a confident boy with hopes of becoming an architect. His greatest champion was Daniel West, the millionaire orphan who had finally found purpose in caring for those who shared his struggle. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, he felt like he was no longer running from his past. He had taken that lonely, abandoned child he once was and offered him a safer path. Watching Oliver's daily progress, Daniel felt a sense of healing he never believed possible. The nightmares about his own parents still plagued him sometimes, but the heartbreak lessened each time he saw Oliver smile. And so, a single cry in a silent hallway at Street Mercy's orphanage changed everything. The millionaire who intended to leave after a mere donation found himself entangled in the most profound journey of all, a journey of healing, family, and hope. Daniel's pursuit of Oliver's mother, the renovations that saved the orphanage, and Sister Margaret's recovered health all proved that even the deepest wounds can mend through compassion, resilience, and unwavering dedication. If this story touched your heart, consider how a simple act of kindness might transform someone else's life. Thank you for watching and sharing in Daniel and Oliver's emotional journey. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel so we can continue bringing you more heartfelt stories that spark hope and inspire change. Join our community and together let's uplift one another, one story at a time. Your support means more than you'll ever know.